Welcome to a special edition of the Darden Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. In this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Megan McGee. Megan is a member of Darden's full-time MBA class of 2021, and she also recently joined the Batten Institute focusing on ETA, that's Entrepreneurship through Acquisition, and alumni programs. In this conversation, Megan and I discuss her entrepreneurial journey, her new role with the Batten Institute, why Darden is a great place for ETA, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. As always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Megan McGee. Megan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. How's everything going?
It's going well. Yeah, it's fall in Charlottesville. It's a beautiful time of year, back to school, all the students around, lots of energy, and the weather is amazing. So I'm doing okay.
When we were setting up this podcast, I was reminded that you were on the podcast as a student way back in 2020 or so?
Yeah, I was. I was a student at Darden from 2019 to 2021, and I was the DSA president. So my VP and I joined you, and I think we were talking about what we were doing at the Darden Student Association and the challenges of going online during COVID and everything we were doing and the school was doing to help our class and the first year class. So it was a crazy time, but I'm glad to be back in a new role with you.
Yeah, quite a time to be the DSA president during those early days of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, I could definitely tell a few stories, but
I'm sure.
I think we were lucky to be at Darden during that time. I know the rest of the world had, everyone had challenges, and I consider ourselves lucky to have been here in Charlottesville and at Darden getting our MBA.
Well, Megan, for folks who haven't listened to that episode, which they should go back and listen to it for sure, but tell us a little bit more about you and your background.
Yeah, I grew up in South Florida. I'm from Fort Lauderdale, and I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My dad and mom owned and worked in a small business that they had for 25 years. And so entrepreneurship and small business ownership was really dinner table conversation in our household. And I was that kid who was always starting little businesses and getting excited about things. So that was my upbringing. I went to Florida State for undergrad and I majored in entrepreneurship. And then I started an e-commerce company, worked for a couple other small businesses before deciding I wanted to take it up a notch and decided to come back to school, get my MBA at Darden with the hope of starting a business or buying a business after I graduated. In my free time, I live on a farm right outside of Charlottesville. I have 2 dogs, and I love the outdoors. I love cooking. I love working out and spending time with my family and friends.
I want to talk a little bit more about your time at Darden. Obviously, you came with this entrepreneurial interest of potentially starting your own business or acquiring a business. How did you explore that interest during your time at Darden?
Yeah, so I came to Darden with a really distinct goal in mind. Like I said, I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I was a little bit open-minded to what that meant. I knew there were several paths I could take. But one goal I had that I wanted to leave Darden with is I wanted to figure out how to raise money. How could I start a business or acquire a business when I didn't necessarily have a large personal capital to invest? And I had no idea how people raised money from venture capital or from investors to do those things. And so that was my goal. So in my first year, I explored starting a company. So I attended Startup Academy at the time, which was a 2-week boot camp for wannabe founders. And then I got really involved with the startup community and the Batten Institute at Darden. I attended all of the career events that I could around venture capital and startups. And I entered into the UVA E-Cup competition and submitted ideas for startups. I worked with a professor at Darden around a startup idea that I had. And then I also found out about this concept of a search fund, and I interned during the school year and during the summer with search fund internships. So I was always pursuing entrepreneurial paths at Darden, but I was focusing my time into two categories. One was the startup and venture capital side of things, and one was the entrepreneurship through acquisition side.
What are some of the entrepreneurial ideas you had during your time at Darden?
Yeah, I had an idea. My company was going to be called Experience Tonight. And the idea was last minute, uh, last minute tickets or last minute bookings to events and experiences in your town. So, if a comedy club has a show that they're putting on that night and they have a few tickets left, we would sell those tickets at a discount and our members would be able to get those tickets. I was able to partner with the late venture velocity professor Damon DeVito, and he was generous enough to gift me some golf course uh, times that we could test as a minimum viable product for this company. And unfortunately, it never ended up taking off and being successful. But I'm actually happy because COVID ended up hitting a few months after this idea was sparked, and COVID would have tanked the business completely. So it worked out that the business didn't work out.
I imagine, though, at the time that was probably maybe a little bit of a setback, or maybe just another iteration on a path. I don't know. How did you think about it?
Yeah, I think it was hard, coming in, I'm a first year, and one of the two paths I wanted to take was starting a company. And the main idea I had come in with was the experience idea. And yeah, it didn't work out. I entered into the E-Cup competition and I didn't even place. And then I tried to launch and see if there was demand for this idea, and there wasn't. So it was helpful to test those things out and have a space where I could fail and be able to fail without much consequence. But yeah, it was a little bit of a bummer that it didn't work out, but I just took it, and I kept going. I kept moving, and it was good to fail early on in my Darden journey because it led me to then pursue other paths.
You mentioned your interest in search funds. For folks who don't know as much about the entrepreneurship through acquisition world or search funds, tell us a little bit more about what a search fund is.
Yeah, so a search fund is an investment vehicle that a motivated entrepreneur creates, either by themselves or with mentors or with investors or all three, that has the purpose of looking for and acquiring a existing, usually mature, profitable business. And then after the acquisition, the entrepreneur steps in and runs the business long term.
So, how did you stay? I mean, how did you continue to pursue this kind of entrepreneurship through acquisition search fund interest during your time at Darden? Because listening to your story, obviously there's these two parallel paths. This more sort of ETA end of things. How did you pursue that?
During my first year, as I mentioned, I was pursuing the startup idea, but I also was learning as much as I could about the search fund entrepreneurship through acquisition path, when I first learned about this as a career path, the concept of buying a business, I was blown away. It felt unreal to me, and it felt exactly like what I wanted to do, but I just hadn't known that this path existed before. And so in my first semester at Darden, it was a lot of just learning as much as I could, drinking through the fire hose, reading articles, listening to podcasts, reading books, and speaking with former searchers and company operators in the search fund world. And then starting around November of my first year, I did an internship with an active searcher that lasted through spring. So this person was actively looking for businesses to buy, and I worked with her for about 10 hours a week in addition to my classes and everything else. And that gave me the inside glimpse into what it looked like to reach out to business owners, how to evaluate businesses, how to conduct due diligence on a business that she was looking to buy. And that was really helpful in my journey. And then I decided after that, and after my failed startup, that I wanted to be really serious about ETA. So I also pursued a summer internship with a search fund acquired operating company. And it was actually acquired by a Darden alum. And I worked with him inside of his business, running the business day to day. So those are the paths I took. I probably spoke with 30 or 40 searchers and operators also during that time, just interviewing them, getting to know their stories, learning about what motivated them to go the search fund route. And through those conversations, it became more and more interesting to me. And it made me realize this was the path that I wanted to pursue myself.
I'm curious what the takeaways were from those 30, 40 conversations. Anything that stands out to you about the kinds of people who decide to go into search fund entrepreneurship through acquisition?
Yeah, it was a mixture of people in terms of what their background was. I would say most people, the tenets that the characteristics that most people shared were a value that they placed on small business ownership and acknowledging that running a small business makes a tremendous impact on society, on employees, on an ability to make an impact in a community. So that was something most people shared, regardless of what background they came from. And really just a, a huge amount of grit and need for autonomy and people who felt fulfilled by um, really leading something and making an impact on others in a way where they had a lot of control over what that looked like.
So, what did you do after you graduated from Darden?
Yeah, so in my second year at Darden, after my internship, I decided I wanted to raise a search fund. And there's three paths you can take when you decide to search. You can go self-funded, meaning that you provide all the capital, you are looking for a business to personally buy, and usually you'll use personal capital and you'll work with the SBA on a loan when you do buy the business, but you have no other financial support and you don't have structured mentorship throughout the search. And then there's the traditional search fund model, which has been around since the 1990s. And this is where an entrepreneur surrounds himself with a group of investors who are supporting them financially and through mentorship. And then there are other models too, like the accelerator model or the single sponsor model. But anyways, so after my summer internship, I decided I wanted to do the traditional model, which meant I would need to raise money from investors. So during the first semester of my second year, I created my PPM, private placement memorandum, which is like, I like to compare it to a big document that's a mixture of your resume, your fund terms, the technical terms of what you're offering and how much money you're raising, that sort of thing. And then 3, your business plan for your search, what industries you're going to go after and what your special sauce is going to look like. So I put together my PPM in fall, and then in spring I started fundraising, speaking with investors and getting them on board to commit to my fund. And then after graduation, I traveled a little bit with some Darden friends. And then in September, I launched my fund and I started searching.
What was the thesis or the orientation of your fund?
I focused on business services, and I had a large focus in the pet care industry. I love animals. I have 2 dogs that are my whole world, and I really believe in the industry, where it's going, that pet owners are increasing pet ownership, that pet owners are seeing their pets as family, and they're spending more and more money on their pets. And at the time, I felt like there could be more professionalization in the industry, and there was opportunity for someone to come in with a lot of eagerness and their Darden MBA education who could make a company better. So I focused a lot of my time in the pet care industry, but I also looked in other industries as well.
I mean, all the things that you just shared about the pets, it sounds right, and it does seem like a booming industry. You think about all the advertisements you see on TV now for real pet food, I guess is the best way to describe it. And the proliferation of pet related services. You can have health insurance for your pet now. There's all kinds of stuff that feels like it's kind of grown up in the recent like five-ish years. I could be wrong about that, but that's how it feels to me at least.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I found that pet care lags behind human care, and the things that we see with human care and human services and food and products, we eventually see in pet. And there's a lot of opportunity for disruption. There's a lot of exciting innovations that are happening. So I agree. It was a really cool industry to spend time in.
So did you end up making any acquisitions as part of that work? Any businesses that you acquired?
I came close 3 times. I went under LOI, so I went under contract with 3 different businesses, and for different reasons, they didn't work out, and I decided to close down my traditional search fund with my investors earlier this year in June.
So how did you end up back at the Darden School of Business? I'm curious what led you to your current role with the Batten Institute.
Yeah. Well, it's great to be back. Uh, as I said, so I graduated in 2021, and I've been in Charlottesville ever since I graduated. I loved Charlottesville so much that I decided to stay in town and conduct my search from Charlottesville. So I've always been in the community. I remained active with Darden as an alumni, and I came back to speak in the ETA class at Darden over the past few years and at the conference that we host. So I kept in touch with Darden faculty and students and with the Batten Institute. I had been a Batten scholar, and so I felt like it was sort of, I wanted to pay it forward and also pay it back to Darden through my time and service to the school. So I was always really connected to the school. And Omar, the executive director of the Batten Institute, reached out to me, and it just happened to be good timing when I was shutting down my fund and there was an opening at the Batten Institute. And the idea for this role as director of ETA really blossomed in those conversations with him, and the focus that Darden is putting on ETA led me to this position. So I'm really happy to be back. It was awesome in my first few weeks to see so many familiar faces and give faculty and staff big hugs. And it just feels like I'm back at home.
It feels like there has been a real explosion of interest in entrepreneurship through acquisition. Why do you think that might be? I feel like I talked to a ton of executive MBA students who are interested in ETA. I'm sure you could say the same for our full-time and part-time MBA students. Why do you think this growth and interest in ETA?
ETA as a career path has really been exploding over the past several years. For example, in the early to mid 2000s, there were fewer than 20 search funds raised each year. And then as recently as 2023, a record number of new search funds were formed, with close to 100 search funds formed in that year. So search funds as a whole are becoming more well known. And because of that, more students are interested in the career path. It's an amazing opportunity for students who want to get into a CEO position relatively quickly. And so people are coming to MBA schools to pursue this path. At Darden specifically, we brought on a new professor, Les Alexander, in the past few years, who is a dedicated faculty who teaches an ETA class. So with his, we now have 3 courses in ETA. And in the past couple of years, we also formed an independent ETA club. So those things, together with the conference that we host, are sparking the interest of our students and, you know, the business world at large around what is the search fund career path and how can I do it?
Well, I know it's early days for you, Megan, in your role here. But what are you excited about? What are you thinking about as you think about ETA related programming and support at Darden?
I am, yes. So in the early days of this position, it's exciting to figure out what the priorities are. At the core, I am helping host the Southeast ETA conference. So this is a annual conference that happens in September. We just co-hosted it this year, and we had over 400 attendees among students, searchers, operators, investors, etc. So that conference is great. We just wrapped that up, and it was very successful. About every month or bi-monthly, I work with the ETA club on hosting a learning series. So typically, one time a month, the ETA club will bring in a speaker, from a Darden alum who's running a business to an investor who's looking to support Darden graduates. And then one other time a month, the club will host a tactical session, preparing for speaking with investors or modeling workshops, due diligence, that sort of thing. So I love co-hosting those. And also coming up, I am working with Alumni Career Services around a program for alumni, Darden alums, who have already graduated and maybe have already had multiple years working for a company or doing whatever they're out there doing, but maybe want to make a pivot and buy a company a few years after graduating. So we're hosting a learning series with them as well, where we bring in Darden alums to speak about their paths in ETA and introduce the career path to them. And then I'm also working with the Career Center with Michelle Rankin around a tactical steps to starting a search fund and launching a career in ETA. specifically with steps for second years, and then eventually we'll work on uh, helping the first years get internships this summer.
Why do you think Darden is a good place for someone who's interested in entrepreneurship through acquisition?
Well, the nature of the Darden curriculum, having such a comprehensive view of being a great general manager, is core to what being a successful searcher requires. So as a searcher, you're looking at I looked at over 7,500 businesses in my 2.5-year search. And even though I mentioned the pet care sector, I looked at dozens of industries and all types of companies, all sizes, spoke with so many different owners, and each one of those was unique. But I was able to look at each one of those with sort of a more global perspective. Um, Not global as in international, but global as in from a high level. Like I could just look at the business and understand how the pieces of the puzzle intersected with each other. And that's something that I think is unique to Darden. The second is with the case study curriculum, the case method. I remember distinctly when I was a first year student walking out of a classroom after going through a case method class, a feeling of dis I didn't feel like everything fit together yet. I felt there were still questions to be answered, and it wasn't a super like satisfying feeling. I walked out of class with still wanting the answers. And what I'm getting at is going through that experience time and time and time again, hundreds of times at Darden, made me really good at operating in ambiguity and being able to make decisions and move forward even when I don't have all the answers. And so that type of skill set creates a really good searcher and a really good business owner and operator. So Darden prepared me very well for that.
Why do you think that ambiguity piece is so important for a founder, operator, somebody who's interested in entrepreneurship?
There's no there's no game plan. There's no set of instructions for how to do things. A lot of times when you're in a business or when you're in a search, the nuances of the specific situation you're looking at are just so that you can't necessarily find the exact answer online or through ChatGPT or even sometimes calling a colleague. Your situation is going to be so unique to your business. And so it's important to be able to operate inside of that ambiguity. I know for being a searcher, it's actually probably the most difficult part of search. It's not finding the right company or negotiating the best deal. Operating in a constant state of ambiguity was the most emotionally draining part because you are looking for a business to buy and you don't know what it's going to be, where you're going to be living, where you're going to be operating, who your employees and customers are going to be. And that's a really difficult place to live. So, as much as you can prepare for that sort of headspace, the better off you'll be.
A question for you about ETA that's been on my mind as we've been talking about here. How do you even find the businesses that you might want to buy? I mean, it's a big world. There's lots of businesses. Even if you say, okay, I want to focus on pet care, something like that. I mean, how many pet related companies must there be in the United States, around the world? How do you narrow the universe?
Every searcher has his or her strategy, but it's important to come up with a criteria at the start of your search for first how you would select an industry, how I even landed on pet care. There are several factors that added to that, not only just because I like pets, but the industry was growing, there is high recurring revenue, it's a relatively fragmented industry with lots of different business owners. So searchers will usually come up with industry criteria. Those were some of mine. And then after that, you'll come up with company criteria. And you'll use different, usually online tools or brokers and advisors who will help you source companies based on your acquisition criteria. And some of those might be geographic searches, or size of company based on employees or financials, and then you go at it. But yeah, every searcher has sort of their special sauce to how they source companies and ultimately how they connect with business owners.
And you just, I mean, as you are developing your thesis here, do you just search on Google, or, I mean, how do you find actual firms that you might be able to acquire?
There are different online software platforms you can use to source your businesses. You can do scrapes of websites like Google Maps, or if you're searching in a specific geography. I liked to start in a geographic specific search, so I would look at all the pet businesses in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area. And I would work with people who would help me make a list of those companies and find the owner's contact information, reach out to the owner, that sort of thing. But yeah, every searcher definitely has their kind of secret sauce on how they source companies. And the idea is to uh try to contact companies in a way that they haven't been contacted before by large private equity firms. You're trying to kind of compete in an area that is not so overpicked.
And I imagine that's gotten more complicated now that it seems like more people may be interested in entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Yeah, I would say I was more I found myself competing, so to speak, more with larger private equity firms and strategic acquirers rather than other searchers. I occasionally, maybe 2 times or 3 times throughout a 2.5-year search, found myself speaking to a company where they were speaking with another searcher, but more often, I found myself competing with private equity because you're right, those firms are also realizing the value that small businesses have, and they are playing in, um, the realm of acquiring smaller and smaller businesses, which is, yeah, making it difficult for searchers to break through the chatter and connect with business owners about their motivation to acquire and operate a business.
With competition like that, when you have these really sort of, I guess, entrenched players that have all these resources, how can someone with a search fund or a smaller player compete? What is the pitch that someone might make in that kind of situation?
I really tried to connect with business owners on a deeper personal level. I tried to be authentic, tell them my story, my background around how I was raised in a family business and how I worked in a family business and I saw the value that it created. Also telling the story of how I personally wanted to step into the business and run it and operate it. I didn't plan on, bringing in a team and getting rid of employees. I really wanted to find a business that had a great existing team that I could step into and learn from and help grow the company for the future. So I did my best to tell that story, and I think most searchers have a story similar to that, not necessarily coming from a family business background, but most searchers have a story that's authentic in that they personally want to run a business and they want to take care of people's employees and customers. Um, Other firms can't always say that same story. And so to me, that was the advantage I had as a searcher. Where I failed as a searcher was I couldn't always, I could rarely compete with larger firms on price. So a strategic acquirer that already owns 25 pet care businesses, they can pay, if there's one pet care business in their target market, they can pay a price for that business that is above market. And my investors and I couldn't, because we were just looking for one business to acquire. So we couldn't always compete on price, though we were able to pay, a reasonable value. But occasionally other acquirers would come in with sort of outlandish values that you couldn't compete with. So that's where it became difficult. And some business owners, it just depended on what they were looking for. Some business owners were just looking for the highest number they could sell their business for, and others cared more about the who and the why behind who, the legacy of their business and who they were passing it on to.
Well, Megan, obviously you have all the work that you're doing here at Darden with the ETA programming and working with all the teams that you mentioned earlier. Is there anything else that you're doing as well, sort of staying engaged with your entrepreneurial interest or ETA? Anything else that you're doing that you'd want to mention here?
I'm still searching on the side, so I still have the ambition to run a business. I've narrowed my search. It's become more important to me over time to be able to live here in Charlottesville. I plan to continue giving back to Darden and being involved in the Batten Institute. And I love my life here in Charlottesville. So a shout out to this special town and geography. If anyone is hesitant on moving here, it's a great place to be. And yeah, otherwise I'm really just enjoying my life here.
Well, that's a natural sort of entree to what do you really like about Charlottesville? Because I know a number of our listeners have never spent time in Charlottesville. They're wondering what it's like, maybe reading a little bit online. But what do you love about Charlottesville?
As I'm sure most people, my answer is going to be basic because I think these are both things that um, most people love about Charlottesville. One is the outdoors, the access we have. We're at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah National Park. It's under a 20-minute drive, and you're inside the gate of the national park, and hundreds of hikes, and there's a reservoir that I bring my paddleboard out to. So lots of outdoor activity. It's a really outdoors and athletic town. There's a lot of athletes who like to run and bike and climb and swim. So I love all of that. And then second is actually I'm going to add three. So second is the food and drink scene here. I call it the Napa of the East Coast. We have over 40 wineries and vineyards in the area. And I haven't even made it to all of them in 5 years. So there's always a place to go. And we have amazing restaurants and chefs who are here. Really, I mean, world-class dining is right here in our town. And I love to eat and drink. And the people too. I've just found the values of people who live here and humility mixed with intelligence and interestingness uh, is is pretty widespread among most people in Charlottesville. And I've just connected really well with people who choose to live here. I think people who choose to live here kind of share some commonalities and values, and I really appreciate that.
Well, Megan, last question for you here. What's your advice for prospective students listening to this episode, thinking about their own MBA journeys? What would you encourage them to keep in mind?
I would say I'm going to spread my decision-making theory. So I have this theory around decision-making that says it's rare in life that you're going to feel 100% confident in a decision that you're making, whether that's going back to get your MBA, where you want to go for your MBA, what career you want to do, even where you want to live or who you want your life partner to be. You're not always going to have 100% confidence. So I've come up with this way where you can make decisions and feel confident about them, even if you don't have that 100% confidence. And I would say find a number, find a percentage that makes you feel comfortable. 70, 80, 90, 99%, even if that's what it is. Like find a number that you would feel comfortable making a decision around. And in your decision-making process, once you reach that number, go for it. Do it. Take the leap, make the decision, and move forward in the best way possible. Because if you are waiting to reach 100% confidence, you might be paralyzed and never make the decision at all.
I think that's a great advice, Megan. And when obviously you're making a big decision like where to go for business school, I do think you could kind of get overwhelmed by information, and there's so much out there, and you can spend hours reading other people's opinions online, and everybody has a different suggestion as to what you should think about as you're making this decision. But getting to a place where you feel confident that you've done the work, you know what you're doing here, and developing a number around that and going forward with the decision. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, and then being able to enjoy. It's really nice sometimes after you make a decision, even if you weren't 100% confidence, when you make a decision, that sense of relief and enjoyment, especially I know how it was around choosing an MBA program. Once I made that decision, it was so nice to just then be able to look into where I wanted to live in Charlottesville and visiting and getting to know people in my upcoming class. And that was the activities beyond the actual decision are the fun part. So get through the decision and enjoy your time.
Well, Megan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was great catching up with you, and look forward to all the things that you're doing with ETA here at Darden.
Thanks, Brett. Looking forward to it too. Have a good rest of your day.
And that was my conversation with Megan McGee, all about her new role at the Batten Institute, focusing on entrepreneurship through acquisition and alumni programs. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We have reached at Darden, that's Darden, @virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.